Damien Croft, the CEO of Aurelian Dynamics, moved through his world like a storm front, a force of nature that commanded respect and left a trail of quiet devastation. At 32, he had built a tech empire on a foundation of pure, unadulterated logic. Emotions were inefficiencies, kindness was a liability, and people were variables in a complex equation he was perpetually solving. His reputation was legendary, not just for his genius, but for his ice-cold demeanor and impossible standards. The most visible casualty of this reputation was the ever-revolving door to his executive assistant's office. The position had a shorter lifespan than a mayfly. The latest, a highly qualified man with a decade of experience, had lasted exactly 6 days before quitting via a blistering email that was now the talk of the 60th floor. He said he'd rather work in a piranha tank, Liam O'Connell, Damien's business partner and only friend, reported with a grim chuckle. He was leaning against the door of Damien's sterile minimalist office, holding 2 coffees. "That's a new one. I think the last one just cried." Damien didn't look up from the complex algorithm displayed on his holographic desk. Piranhas are efficient predators. He should be so lucky. The human resources department is incompetent. Find me someone who understands that this is a workplace, not a therapy session. "We're running out of qualified people in this city, Dame," Liam said, setting a coffee on the corner of Damien's desk. "You've burned through the best. Maybe the problem isn't them." Damien finally looked up, his gray eyes as cold and sharp as shards of ice. "The problem, Liam, is a lack of excellence. I require a machine. I keep getting people." The interview process that afternoon was a predictable disaster. Candidate after candidate was summarily dismissed for perceived flaws, a typo on a resume, a moment of hesitation on a technical question, a handshake deemed insufficiently firm. By 4 o'clock, Damien was ready to declare the entire talent pool a lost cause. Then she walked in. Her name was Isabella Rossi. She was not like the others. Her suit was simple, professional but not designer. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple, practical style. But what struck Damien was the quiet, unshakable calm in her brown eyes. She looked at him not with the terrified reverence he was used to, but with a simple, direct curiosity. He glanced down at her resume, his lip curling in a faint sneer. "An art history degree," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, followed by a position as an administrative assistant at a nonprofit art gallery. "Tell me, Ms. Rossi, what in this colorful background makes you think you are qualified to work here?" Isabella met his gaze without flinching. "Art history teaches you to see the story behind the object, to find the human element in the data, and the nonprofit world teaches you how to achieve the impossible with no resources. I thought both skills might be useful." Her answer was so unexpected, so completely devoid of the usual corporate jargon, that Damien was momentarily silenced. Liam, who had insisted on sitting in, hid a smile behind his hand. "A simple test," Damien said, recovering his composure. He pointed to a complex, abstract sculpture in the corner of his office, a chaotic tangle of polished steel. "That is a representation of our core logistics algorithm. Explain its business philosophy to me." He expected her to stammer, to talk about synergy or disruption. He expected her to fail. Isabella stood, walked over to the sculpture, and studied it for a long moment. "It's efficient," she said finally. "It's brilliant. It finds the fastest path from A to B. But it's cold. There's no room for error, no path for correction. If a single piece were to break, the whole structure would collapse. It assumes every variable is predictable. But people aren't predictable, Mr. Croft. Sometimes the most important path isn't the fastest one." Liam's jaw dropped.
Damien stared at her, an unreadable expression on his face. She hadn't just answered his question. She had diagnosed the core flaw in his entire life's philosophy. She hated her for it, and he was utterly intrigued. "You're hired," he said, the words surprising even himself. "1 week, a trial. Prove your philosophy isn't a liability." Isabella nodded, a small, knowing smile on her lips. As she left, Liam turned to Damien, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Did you just hire an art historian to be your executive assistant because she psychoanalyzed your sculpture?" "I hired her to prove that her philosophy is a weakness. She'll be gone in a week. I'll bet you $10,000 she lasts a month." Damien smirked. "You're on. It's the easiest money I'll ever make." He turned back to his desk, but for the first time all day, the lines of code seemed less interesting than the memory of a woman with calm brown eyes who had seen the flaw in his perfect cold machine.
Isabella's first week at Aurelian Dynamics was a descent into a world of controlled, high-pressure chaos. Damien was relentless. He was not just a demanding boss, he was a silent predator, watching for any sign of weakness. He communicated in clipped, monosyllabic emails. He would change his schedule at a moment's notice, expecting her to rearrange meetings with global CEOs across 3 different time zones flawlessly. He was testing her, trying to make her break. But Isabella did not break. She was quiet, methodical, and possessed a level of intuitive intelligence that Damien found both fascinating and infuriating. She began to anticipate his needs before he voiced them. His coffee, black with 1 raw sugar, would be on his desk moments before he realized he wanted it. The files for a meeting would be prepared not just with financial data, but with short, insightful biographies of the attendees, noting personal details like a recent family vacation or a favorite charity. The human element he always ignored. He saw it as an inefficiency. "I don't need to know that Mr. Tanaka is a fan of 18th century opera, Ms. Rossi. I need to know the Q3 projections of his microchip division." "His company just donated $1 million to the Metropolitan Opera," she replied calmly, not looking up from her screen. "He might appreciate you acknowledging it." Damien had scoffed. But during the video conference with Mr. Tanaka, he had, on a whim, mentioned the donation. The stern Japanese CEO's face had broken into a warm, genuine smile, and the entire tone of the difficult negotiation had shifted. They secured the contract that afternoon. Damien told himself it was a coincidence. The real test came on Thursday. Damien was in the middle of a hostile takeover bid for a smaller rival. The final meeting with their board was scheduled for 3 p.m. It was a brutal, high-stakes negotiation, and Damien was in his element. At noon, Isabella entered his office, her face pale. "Mr. Croft," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I've just received a call. The lead negotiator for the other side, Mr. Davies, his wife was just in a car accident. She's in critical condition at St. Michael's Hospital." Damien's mind immediately calculated the new variables. Davies was their key opponent. With him gone, their board would be in disarray. This was the perfect moment to strike, to push their advantage. "Reschedule the meeting for tomorrow. Inform our legal team that we will be presenting our final, non-negotiable offer. This is the opening we needed." "I already rescheduled the meeting," Isabella said. "Good. For when?" "For next week," she replied. Damien froze. "You did what? That's an eternity. We lose all momentum." "I also sent a floral arrangement to the hospital in the name of Aurelian Dynamics," Isabella continued, her gaze steady. "And I made a donation in his wife's name to the hospital's trauma wing. I felt it was the appropriate human thing to do." A cold, silent fury built in Damien's chest. She had acted without his authority.
She had made an emotional decision, a catastrophic tactical error in the biggest deal of the year. He was about to unleash a torrent of rage that would have sent any of his previous assistants running from the building in tears. "Get out," he said, his voice dangerously low. Isabella stood her ground. "Mr. Croft, a man's family is in crisis. This company is not so weak that it needs to build its victories on the foundations of another person's tragedy. Showing compassion is not a weakness, it's a strength." "I will be the judge of what constitutes strength in this company, Ms. Rossi. You have made a monumental error. Clean out your desk. Your trial period is over." Isabella's shoulders slumped for a fraction of a second, the only sign of her own disappointment. But she didn't plead, she didn't cry, she simply nodded. "As you wish, Mr. Croft. I'll be gone within the hour." She turned and walked out, closing the door softly behind her, leaving Damien alone in his silent, perfect office, his victory within his grasp, feeling more like a failure than ever before.
Damien spent the next hour pacing his office like a caged tiger. The logic was undeniable. Isabella's move was a colossal blunder. She had sacrificed a key strategic advantage for what? Sentiment? Decency? These were abstract concepts, worthless in the brutal calculus of corporate warfare. He had been right all along. Her philosophy was a liability. He had won his bet with Liam. He buzzed the outer office, his voice clipped and cold. "Ms. Rossi? Is she gone yet?" A hesitant voice answered. It was one of the junior assistants. "Sir, she's still here. She's at her desk." "And why is that?" Damien snapped. "Sir, the entire board of the other company is on a conference call with her." Damien's blood ran cold. He strode to the glass wall of his office. He saw Isabella at her desk, a headset on, speaking in a low, calm voice. She was surrounded by a small crowd of his own stunned executives. He stormed out. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded. Isabella held up a hand, signaling for him to wait. She continued speaking into the headset. "No, Mr. Chen, I completely understand. Please, take all the time you need. Our thoughts are with Mr. Davies and his wife. We will be here when you are ready. Yes, of course. Goodbye." She took off the headset and looked up at Damien. Her eyes were not those of a defeated employee. They were the eyes of a diplomat who had just averted a war. "The board wanted to personally thank you for your compassion," she said, her voice even. "They were so moved by the gesture that they have voted to cease all defensive measures. They said they would rather be acquired by a company with a soul than fight for a company that has lost its own. They have agreed to your original terms. Unconditionally. The deal is done." The silence in the office was deafening. Damien stared at her, his mind struggling to process the information. He had planned to win by force, by leveraging their weakness. She had won by showing them strength, the strength of character. She hadn't just closed the deal. She had forged a partnership built on a foundation of goodwill and respect. It was a victory more total, more absolute than anything his aggressive tactics could have ever achieved. He looked at the faces of his own team. They weren't looking at him, their brilliant, ruthless CEO. They were looking at Isabella with a new, profound respect. In that moment, he was no longer the most powerful person in the room. He started, but the words wouldn't come. He had been so spectacularly, humiliatingly wrong. That evening, he asked her to stay late. He didn't apologize, not directly. He wasn't capable of it. Instead, he asked her about her life, about the nonprofit, about her art history degree. He listened. For the first time, not as a boss evaluating an asset,
but as a man trying to understand a world he had long ago forgotten. He learned about her grandmother, a formidable woman who had raised her and whose mounting medical bills were the silent engine driving her relentless work ethic. He saw the quiet, uncomplaining sacrifice that underpinned her calm exterior. "You should have told me," he said, his voice rough with an emotion he couldn't name. "You never asked," Isabella replied simply. The truth of her words hit him with the force of a physical blow. He had never asked. He never saw past the variable to the person. The next day, two things happened. First, a check for $10,000 was quietly deposited into Liam O'Connell's account. Second, a new corporate entity was formed by Aurelian Dynamics' legal team, the Rossi Foundation, a fully funded nonprofit dedicated to providing financial assistance to families facing catastrophic medical debt. Its first beneficiary was Isabella's grandmother. When Isabella saw the paperwork on her desk, she walked into Damien's office with tears in her eyes. "You didn't have to do this." "I know," he said, not looking at her, his gaze fixed on the city below. "Consider it a strategic investment in the company's human capital." It was the closest he could get to saying thank you. It was the closest he could get to admitting that he needed her, not just as an assistant, but as the keeper of his company's lost soul.
The dynamic between them shifted. Damien was still demanding, his standards still impossibly high, but the cold, dismissive edge was gone. He started to rely on Isabella's judgment, not just for scheduling, but for strategy. He would call her into meetings with his top executives and, after they had all given their data-driven analyses, he would turn to her and ask, "What's the human element, Miss Rossi? What are we missing?" Her insights were consistently brilliant. She saw the market not as a collection of consumers, but as a community of people with needs, fears, and aspirations. Her human-centric approach, which he had once scorned as a weakness, began to yield extraordinary results. Customer loyalty soared. Employee morale, once in the gutter, began to climb. The company wasn't just more profitable, it was becoming a better place to work. Liam watched the transformation with quiet satisfaction. "You know," he told Damien one afternoon, "I think you owe me another $10,000. She hasn't just lasted a month. She's remaking your entire company." But with Isabella's rising influence came a new, dangerous threat. Sebastian Crow, the CEO of a ruthless rival firm, Crow Innovations, was a man who saw business as a zero-sum game. He had been watching Aurelian's recent successes with a mixture of envy and suspicion. He didn't see a change in philosophy. He saw a new, exploitable weakness, and he saw Isabella as the key. He began a subtle campaign to poach her. First came the feelers from headhunters, offering her positions with astronomical salaries. Isabella politely declined them all. Then Crow made his move directly. He accidentally ran into her at a coffee shop near the office. He was charming, complimentary, a wolf in bespoke clothing. "Isabella Rossi," he said, extending a hand. "Sebastian Crow. I've been hearing your name in some very interesting circles. They say you're the secret weapon behind Damien Croft's newfound heart." "I'm just an assistant, Mr. Crow," Isabella replied, her expression neutral. "Oh, I think you're much more than that," he purred. "Damien is a brilliant man, but he's a sledgehammer. You've taught him how to be a scalpel. That's a rare talent, a talent that, frankly, is wasted on him. Crow Innovations is looking for a new chief strategy officer. The position is yours if you want it. The salary will make what Damien pays you look like a rounding error." He was testing her loyalty, trying to find her price.
He believed, as Damien once had, that everyone had one. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Crow," Isabella said, her voice firm, "but I am not for sale. My loyalty isn't to a paycheck, it's to a mission, and I believe in the mission we're building at Aurelian." Crow's charming smile faltered for a fraction of a second. He had expected her to be flattered, tempted. He had not expected to be so summarily dismissed. He saw the same unshakable integrity that Damien had seen, and it didn't intrigue him, it infuriated him. "A mistake, Miss Rossi," he said, his voice losing its warmth. "Loyalty to a man like Damien Croft is a bad investment. He's a predator. He'll devour you when you are no longer useful to him." He walked away, leaving Isabella with a cold sense of foreboding. She had not just rejected a job offer, she had made a powerful enemy. And she knew, with a chilling certainty, that Sebastian Crow was not a man who took no for an answer. He would not try to hire her again, he would try to destroy her.
Sebastian Crow's attack was not on the company, but on Isabella herself. It was subtle, personal, and vicious. He hired a private investigator to dig into her past, searching for any scrap of dirt, any mistake he could weaponize. He found nothing. Her life was a clean, simple story of hard work and quiet sacrifice. So, Crow decided to invent a scandal. He used his contacts in the tabloid media to plant a story. The headline was explosive. "The CEO's pawn. Has Aurelian Dynamics' new VP slept her way to the top?" The article was a masterpiece of innuendo and fabricated sources. It painted Isabella as a manipulative opportunist who had used a personal relationship with Damien to gain power. It hinted at a secret affair, twisting her promotion into a sordid tale of corporate indecency. It was designed to shatter her reputation and, more importantly, to sow seeds of doubt in Damien's mind. The morning the story broke, the office was a sea of whispers and sideways glances. Isabella walked through the 60th floor feeling the weight of 1,000 invisible judgments. Her calm exterior was a fortress, but inside, she felt the walls begin to crumble. She had faced down corporate bullies and impossible odds, but this was different. This was an attack on her character, a poison she couldn't see. She walked into Damien's office, the offending tabloid clutched in her hand. He was standing by the window, his back to her, his posture rigid. "I didn't," she started, her voice trembling for the first time. "None of it is true." "I know," he said without turning around. His simple, immediate belief in her was a lifeline. He turned to face her, his eyes not filled with suspicion, but with a cold, protective fury she had never seen before. "This is Crow's work," he said. "It's his signature. Attack the person, not the company. He's trying to isolate you, to make you toxic. He thinks he can break our trust." "Will he?" Isabella whispered. Damien closed the distance between them. He looked down at her, his gaze intense. "Isabella, when I hired you, I told you that you were a strategic investment. This is a hostile attack on a key asset. We are not going to retreat. We are going to counterattack, and we are going to decimate him." The plan they devised was not one of corporate defense, but of devastating offense. They knew Crow's weakness was his vanity, his obsession with his own public image as a visionary, a disruptor. They decided to use that vanity against him. Aurelian Dynamics announced a last-minute, high-profile Future of Tech Summit. They invited the biggest names in the industry, the media, the investors. And they made Sebastian Crow the guest of honor, inviting him to give the keynote address. It was an irresistible piece of bait. The chance to stand on Damien Croft's stage and declare his own superiority was something Crow's ego could never refuse. He accepted immediately, seeing it as the ultimate victory lap. He thought he had Damien on the ropes, that this was a desperate attempt at appeasement. He had no idea he was walking into the most public, most humiliating ambush of his life. As the day of the summit arrived, Isabella felt a tremor of fear. This was a high-risk gamble. If it failed, it would not only validate Crow's narrative, but also make Damien look weak and foolish. "Are you sure about this?" she asked Damien as they stood backstage, watching the auditorium fill with the most powerful people in the tech world. Damien looked at her, a small, confident smile on his lips. "I have never been more sure of anything in my life. He thinks this is his stage. He's about to find out it's yours."
Sebastian Crow took the stage to thunderous applause. The spotlight illuminated his confident smile as he stood at the podium, a conquering hero. He began his keynote with a thinly veiled jab at Aurelian dynamics, speaking of old models of leadership and the need for unsentimental, data-driven vision. He was in his element, his voice resonating with power. Backstage, Damien gave Isabella a nod. "Now." Isabella walked out from the wings. She was not dressed as a victim. She wore a simple, elegant crimson dress, a color of power and defiance. She held no notes. She walked not to the side of the stage, but directly to the center podium, stopping just beside a stunned Sebastian Crow. The applause faltered, replaced by a confused murmur. "Mr. Crow, I apologize for the interruption," Isabella said, her voice calm and clear, amplified by the microphone. "But you were just speaking about vision. I'd like to share a different kind of vision with our audience today." Before Crow could react, the massive screen behind him, which had been displaying his corporate logo, flickered to life. It was not a graph or a chart. It was a simple, high-resolution image of a newspaper article, a small, local paper from a town in Ohio, dated 15 years prior. The headline read, "Local Factory Closes, Town Devastated by Outsourcing Deal Engineered by Crow Innovations." Crow froze, his face turning pale. The screen changed. Another headline, this one from a tech journal. "Crow Innovations praised for record profits after aggressive restructuring." "This is the data-driven vision Mr. Crow speaks of," Isabella said, her voice ringing through the silent auditorium. "A vision where the data points are thousands of lost jobs, broken families, and hollowed-out communities." The screen changed again, this time showing internal emails, leaked by a disgruntled former Crow employee whom Damien's team had quietly located. The emails showed Crow and his executives callously discussing the human cost of their restructuring as unfortunate but necessary collateral damage. "This is the unsentimental leadership he champions," Isabella continued, her voice gaining strength. "The kind of leadership that sees a town's soul as a line item on a balance sheet." Crow stood paralyzed, his public execution happening in real time, broadcast to the entire industry. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. "The future of tech isn't about cold, hard data," Isabella declared, her gaze sweeping across the stunned audience. "It's about how we use that data. It's about building companies that lift people up, not cast them aside. It's about finding a better path, a path where success isn't measured by what you acquire, but by what you build. A path where compassion isn't a liability, but the most valuable asset of all." She finished, and for a moment, the silence was absolute. Then, a single person in the front row began to clap. It was Liam. Soon, others joined in, and in seconds the entire auditorium was on its feet, a roaring wave of applause not for the fallen titan at the podium,
but for the quiet, unknown woman who had just spoken a profound and necessary truth. Sebastian Crowe's career was over. The scandal dubbed the Crowe Papers became a national story. His investors fled, his board ousted him, and his empire crumbled under the weight of his own hubris. In the quiet aftermath, Damien and Isabella stood in his office, looking out at the city lights. Their partnership had been forged in crisis and solidified in victory. The company was stronger than ever, its new soul shining brightly. "You know," Damien said, turning to her, a genuine warmth in his eyes she had never seen before. "I started all of this because I felt like I had lost my way, lost the best parts of my parents." "You didn't lose them," Isabella said softly, taking his hand. "You just needed someone to remind you where to look." He looked at their joined hands, then back at her. The impossible boss and the stubborn assistant had not just saved a company, they had saved each other. He realized his feelings for her ran deeper than professional respect, deeper than gratitude. In her, he had found the human element he had been missing not just in his company, but in his own life. The next chapter of their story was just beginning.
What do you think is the most important quality in a leader? Is it brilliance or is it character? Isabella's story is a powerful testament to the idea that true strength lies in compassion and integrity. Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of justice and quiet courage inspired you, please show your support by hitting that like button and sharing it with someone who believes that a person's soul is worth more than any stock price. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell for more unforgettable stories where the underestimated finally get their voice heard. Thank you for watching.